It's finally time to do one of my favorite videos that I film, and that is my yearly reading wrap up of books that I've read in 2023. I have been doing this video since I believe 2015, so we're coming up on almost 10 years, and it's only gotten better since then. I used to just do it really short and quick of like, here are all the books I read, and then say nothing about the books. I think my reading wrap up from last year as well as 2021 are both when I started to not only talk about the books, but also mention what they're about and what I would recommend. I'm gonna link those videos down below if you want to see my previous year's reading wrap-ups. But I'm really excited about this video because this was the year that I not only created my Goodreads account, but this was also the year where I really expanded my reading genres and started to try out the more, I guess, like popular or trendy books that I kept seeing online. I dove headfirst into the book community on TikTok and Instagram. I have a Goodreads account. I listen to book podcasts. I want to be basically a book content creator at this point, and I started making more book videos the last couple of months, and I'm actually filming my January TBR right after this video, so make sure that you are subscribed because that will be out shortly. But today we are doing the yearly wrap up for books that I read in 2023. I am so excited to chat books with you today. I have my 2023 journal in front of me because in the journal I have a page, just books read in 2023, and then I also have my Goodreads pulled up so I can cross-reference because I don't remember what I rated all of these books off the top of my head, so I want to double check to make sure I say the correct rating. Definitely follow me on Goodreads. I'll link it down below. I will also link my book Instagram account. It's almost to 1,000 followers on there already, so if you love book content, go follow that Instagram page. I feel like that Instagram account is such a fun outlet for me. It's so interactive. The community is so nice and engaging. I feel like I'm more connected on that Instagram account more than any other account of mine, and I have like 6, not going to lie. But I've gathered up all of the books that I've read this year. I have 4-ish piles here. These are my January TBR books, so I'll make a video on this next, but they're just here for background purposes. My goal was to read 30 books this year, and I actually only read 23 or 24 books, but I did go through a pretty bad reading slump a few months ago. Just with the transition from warm summer to winter hit me pretty hard. I could talk about the reading slump, but I don't think it really matters. The point is I read as many books as I could, and my goal for the following year is always to read more books than the last, but this year is pretty ambitious because my new reading goal is to read 50 books in 2024, so we'll see if I can do that. I'm gonna link my book playlist down below, so any other videos that I've done on reading will be there. But I really want to get into the books that I've read this year, so let's get started. I started this last year off with reading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. My partner Ashton and I went to New York at the very start of 2023, and this was in the McNally bookstore, I believe is what it was called. I think it was McNally Jackson or something like that. It's in the Seaport area, I think. I love The Haunting of Hill House adaptation on Netflix. I love Mike Flanagan, and I love everything that he creates, and knowing that Hill House was based off of this novel, I was so eager to read this and see how, oh, McNally Jackson. There's the bookmark from it. I was so eager to read this book and just see kind of what changed, what they kept. Not only does the Netflix version of The Haunting of Hill House have a book that a character in the show like wrote, but to break another dimensional wall even more, it's all based off of this book. It's so eerie, so scary. A lot of differences. Like for example, there are a lot of the same characters in this, but none of them are siblings the way that Mike Flanagan had them all being siblings in the show. So it is roughly based off of like this scary book, but it's not directly the same plot. Mike Flanagan definitely pulled a lot of inspiration from this, but very unsettling, very well done. I love the texture of like uneven pages on the edges, and you can see on the soft cover like parts of the story. You can see the picnic, you can see the girl laying down there. Really good. It was a weird horror book to start the year off with, but I had just bought it in January, so I was reading it in New York, reading it on the plane, reading it when I got home. I believe I gave this 4 stars on Goodreads. So that was the start of my year. The second book that I read was Lord of the Butterflies by Andrea Gibson. This is a short collection of poetry. It's from the publishing firm Button Poetry, which is one of my favorites. They're also local to Minneapolis. This was a really, really good take on, you know, sexuality, growing up, America, feminism. I didn't really know that it was going to be queer until I started reading some of her very personal poetry poetry in here, and it was just so well done. Like there's one called Ivy that was beautiful. If you like poetry, you'll like this, but I am hesitant to recommend poetry to the book girlies that are reading like romance books, because then this probably isn't for you. But I am such a little geek for poetry. It was my focus in college. I love writing poetry, so I ate this up. I also gave this 5 stars on Goodreads. Definitely some modern poetry that was well written that I related to. I feel like it took me a couple of months in this year before I really found my groove with reading, because the first couple books feel so random to me. The third book that I read was The Witch of the Woods. Look at this cover. Beautiful, beautiful book. And also, this is like how the book came and looks and is meant to be printed. So it looks stained, but it's like part of the publishing. And then everything in the book, the only color used is red, but it's so beautiful. I've learned a lot in this. It's a very like spiritual how-to self-aid book, not really self-help, but as it says on the cover, it has spells, charms, divination, remedies, and folklore. So I love reading books like this. They're just like a little magical book to me, and I try to pick up as much information spirituality-wise as I can. A lot of good reminders in here for sure on ancestral work, herbalism, altars, signs and superstitions, how to cleanse your house, lots of spiritual tools. I gave this book 5 stars because it's a really good book to have if you are spiritual or a witch or you want this in your home. Definitely recommend. I believe it was her first book ever written too. That was by Kylie Mann. Okay, this is when I start to actually read some fiction and romance novels, but I think I read this in February last year because it was like Valentine's Day romance books, and that is Delilah Green Doesn't Care. I only gave this book 3 stars. It wasn't my favorite. I definitely lost interest about 3/4 of the way through. It's a queer romance novel. If I remember correctly, I think there's a bit of like a betting trope where there was a bet that somebody wouldn't get with her or date her. I don't know. It's got like that big city girl returning to her hometown where she doesn't feel connected to what's left of her family. Her stepsister's friend is like who she's like betting to try to get with. There's a wedding that she's going to, but it just wasn't a favorite. But I do want to read a ton of queer books. It's hard to find good queer novels or queer books in general, and representation is so important. So I don't want to bash this book because it is really good. It just wasn't one of my favorite queer love stories. Out of all the queer books that I've read so far, I don't think this is one of my favorites, but I know that a lot of people did enjoy it, so definitely give it a shot. Ashley Hearing Blake, she writes a lot of like overlapping stories that exist in the same universe. So I know she has Iris Kelly Doesn't Date, and Iris Kelly is a character in this. I think there's another one based off of like the characters in this book, so I will give Iris Kelly Doesn't Date a chance because it wasn't terrible. I did enjoy it, but toward the end, I really just had to like get through it. The next book that I read was Someone Who Will Love You in Your Damaged Glory. I believe this is a collection of essays by Raphael Bob Waksberg. He delivers a fabulous offbeat collection of short stories about love, the best and worst thing in the universe. I only gave this one 2 stars. I had a really hard time getting into it. Short stories sometimes are such a hit or miss because they are short stories, so it's hard for me to get attached or really in it. I don't remember anything about this one, honestly. I might as well have just DNF'd it, but I thought it was a beautiful cover and title, and that's why I bought it and wanted to give it a shot. But the next book that I read was a memoir by Terry Chaney called Manic. It's about her experience with bipolar and the effects that it had on her life. I was very intrigued by this book. I did rate it 3 stars, which isn't a low rating to me. Like 3 stars is a very average rating in my rating system. 4 stars is I loved it, but it wasn't like obsessively best book of my life. 3 stars is like I liked it, you know? And then 5 stars is like top tier. I love reading memoirs. I read a lot of memoirs, so if you are interested in hearing about somebody's bipolar experience, definitely give this book a shot. Again, it wasn't like one of my favorites, but I feel like it's hard to really rate and review memoirs because it is somebody's personal story. Definitely tough to read. There were a lot of things in here that are just really sad or just hard based on what she struggles with. I did underline a lot in here though that I could relate to. Like on the very first page, she says, "Life for me is defined not by time, but by mood." And I relate to that. When I'm manic, all I remember is the moment. When I'm depressed, all I remember is the pain. The surrounding details are lost on me. So there were a lot of parts in here where I could relate to as somebody with my own mental health stuff. stuff that this book talks about, and that's why I wanted to read it. The next book that I read, I think was the biggest book that I read this year, and this is almost 500 pages. Yeah, just about 500 pages, and that was Kristen Hanna's Firefly Lane. This was when I was watching the TV show on Netflix and obsessively like in that world. I loved Kate and Tully, and I loved the show so much that it made me want to read the book. The book is very different from the show, and to be honest, I feel like I liked the show more for how they adapted the book, but the book was still really good. It just took me a while to get through it. I don't know if Kristen Hanna is an author for me. I will give some of her other works a shot, but this wasn't something that I like loved. It was a good book, and I knew where it was going because of the show. The ending was really tough, and it seemed like the ending came so fast, whereas in the show they really prolonged that final plot. I just don't want to give it away. It's very sad, but it has a big emphasis on female friendships and female relationships, the relationships between mother and daughter. So if that's something of interest to you, I would definitely give this a chance. I rated this book 4 stars. The next book that I read was when my friends and I started our book club. This was the first book that we decided on for our book club, and that was Nita Pro's debut novel, The Maid. This was really cute. I think I gave this 5 stars. Looking back, I think it was a generous 5 stars, and now I would probably rate it 4 stars, just because I loved it and I read it so quickly that when I was in it and I had just finished reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I was still fresh from like finishing the book when I rated it, but now having time to reflect, I think I would give it 4 stars. A really good whodunit game. You literally feel like you're playing the game Clue or watching a murder mystery reading this, and the main character, Molly, the maid, she is so quirky and so easy to care about, and I feel like it's hard to create those types of characters that you really empathize with right away, but I was genuinely surprised at how quickly I finished this book, because this was the first book of the year that I was able to finish so quickly, and I feel like that momentum really got me started with reading books fast in the summer. And at this point, we are in full swing. I'm at the pool, I'm outside, I'm in my hammock, I'm reading a ton, the days are long, the sun is hot, I'm outside tanning and reading. So this is when it starts to get busy. The next book that I read was another collection of poetry called If My Body Could Speak by Blythe Bard, and again published by Button Poetry. This one I think is about, honestly, being a girl, body image, growing up, sexuality. Once again, I didn't realize this would be queer until I was reading her poetry and found things I could relate to, but really good modern poetry just about life. I don't know, I feel like poems, if you write poetry, it's always like from the darkest, most emotional part of your soul, but you could read this in one sitting. So if you like poetry, If My Body Could Speak, I think I rated this 5 stars again, just because I love poetry. The next book that I read, I was really excited that it had come out on paperback this last summer, and that is Taylor Jenkins Reid's Carrie Soto Is Back. This is like the 3rd book in this universe that she created that I've read. So in my opinion, it goes 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Malibu Rising, and then Carrie Soto Is Back. It's also the order that she wrote these characters in. I think I gave this book 3 or 4 stars. I really wanted to love it because I loved Evelyn Hugo and Malibu Rising so much, but she kind of lost me in the fact that this was literally just about tennis. It was easy for me to get connected to her as a tennis player and like feel that empathy toward it, but there was no romance in here. There was a little bit of romance, but it really was just tennis with a sub focus on her relationship to her father as well as romance, but it wasn't like Malibu Rising or Evelyn Hugo at all, in my opinion. If you played tennis, if you love tennis, you will probably enjoy this book much better than I did. I still loved it because it was Taylor Jenkins Reid and I love the way that she writes, but it didn't have the same feeling that Malibu Rising gave me. It is a summer book in my opinion. Like reading this felt like summer. I was out by my pool. I think I read this on a flight to California. Like it was a good summer book. I cried at some parts, but if I were to rank all of the Taylor Jenkins Reid books that I've read, this would not rank at the top. It probably at this point would be like 4th or 5th place. At this point in the summer, I wanted something fluffy to read at the pool, so I read Colleen Hoover's Heart Bones, and honestly, this is the perfect summer book. I gave this 4 stars, which I think is pretty generous for Colleen Hoover. I know a lot of people like to read Colleen Hoover, and I myself have a lot of her books, so I'm not trying to bash on her. What I'm trying to say is, to me, Colleen Hoover books are like super easy. They're like picture books in my mind because the text is always huge, the plot is always really easy to get through, and I read them really quickly. So it's really helpful to anybody that is going through a reading slump or just getting back into reading. I would recommend Colleen Hoover. But to me, her books are kind of like palate cleansers when I just want to turn my brain off a little bit and read something fluffy or easy, or a plot that I know like they'll end up together in the end. So with that going into this, I will say that I liked this book so much more than I expected, and it was the perfect summer read. It takes place mostly on a beach, in like a beach town. It has like that summer break at the beach house feeling, you know, where she is just living at her father's house on the beach house vibes, summer nights, bonfires with friends by the beach. That's not really the plot. It just felt like such a summer book. Like you're just on summer vacation. There's sand everywhere. They're at the beach. I like the heart bones, like analogy, I guess, in the book. And it was really enjoyable. Definitely not like that spicy for Colleen Hoover, but I feel like part of that might be because they're teenagers, and it's just weird. I do think it's weird writing about teenagers in smut, because I don't feel like we as adults should be reading underage characters doing that, if that makes sense out loud. I still really liked it, and it was like the perfect summer book for me. The next book that I read so fast. I could not put this down. It is Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I love this one. If you're looking for a book to get lost in and to read quickly and to feel like in love with the story, Maybe in Another Life was so good, so cute. I read it so quickly, and it had me thinking about my life and every possible life I could have lived. It is crazy, and the ending was not what I expected. When she started doing something with the plot, without giving it away, I thought the ending was going to go in one direction, but when it went in like separate directions, I understood why it had to. It started to make me sad for all of the lives that I might be living in other parallel universes out there. I don't know, it was so good, such a good summer read. The protagonist in this, Hannah, she basically moves back to Los Angeles after being on the East Coast. Things didn't work out, and then you see her life kind of like going in 2 possible directions, and some things overlap, some things don't, and it just like makes you think. But it's a really good love story. In a way, it's 2 love stories, and this is definitely one of my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid books. I think it goes Evelyn Hugo, Malibu Rising, Maybe in Another Life. 5 stars. The next book that I read over the summer was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I did really want to enjoy this book. Emily Henry, I just don't know if she is an author for me. I read Book Lovers and didn't really like it. It was fine, but it was hard to get through, and People We Meet on Vacation, I felt like it was the same way. I know that she is the queen of banter, and there is a lot of good banter in this book, but I just got bored. I kept like skimming it pretty quickly just to finish the book. I still want to read Emily Henry's other works to see if I enjoy Happy Place, Funny Story, or Beach Read more. This felt like a summer book. I mean, the color itself, that bright orange, feels like July to me. So, and that's exactly when I read this, in July. I don't know, I just couldn't get attached to this book. I gave this one 2 stars. We are at book number 14 for the year, and the next one that I read was for my following month. I think it was August book club book that we chose, and that is Did You Hear About Kitty Carr by Crystal Smith Paul. This is her debut novel, and it is so good. I mean, Taylor Jenkins Reid herself has like the quote review at the top, intoxicating and seductive. It definitely has similar Evelyn Hugo vibes, more so about how this book is about an older woman that is sharing her life story. I will say it took me about 1/3 of the way through this book before it started to really click, and then once it clicked, I got so invested, so attached, that that's when I went back to reread some of the earlier chapters that had names and characters that I just wasn't attached to yet. So if you're reading this and you're not feeling that right away, give it maybe like 100 pages. Yeah, I'd say about 100 to 130 pages, and then it should start to make sense. This book had me reading it so quickly, but it also had me Googling a lot afterwards and looking up, you know, some of the historical fiction in this. I wanted to see how accurate it was, if anybody else had similar stories, and I learned a lot. It's very sad, but really cool, and I love like the ancestry, like family tree history period pieces like this. So this was such an amazing debut novel about a very important topic. 5 stars, hands down. So after I finished Kitty Carr, I wanted something pretty fluffy. So I read Maybe Someday by Colleen Hoover and absolutely hated it. I would give this one 0 stars if I could. I thought it was so bad. I'm so sorry if you liked this one, but I just do not like cheating tropes. And I'm sorry if that's a spoiler for this. It really shouldn't be. The whole book itself, I feel like they're cheating in certain ways and then trying to justify it. But if you like boys playing guitar at you, like, it's so funny because this was around like when the Barbie movie came out, so I had just seen that in the theater, and they have that iconic scene where all of the Kens are like playing guitar to Barbie. If you want that, that's what this book is. It's about this guy playing guitar at his roommate basically, and then they cheat. The end. Don't even read it. Colleen Hoover has some fluffy books that I enjoy reading. I did not enjoy that one. The next book that I read though for my September book club book is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This was my first Riley Sager book and I really loved it. 5 stars. If you want to get into thrillers, I recommend starting with this book because it's not that big and I got through this in a couple of days. I was on a road trip to Iowa and I never read in the car, and I was reading this book the whole drive down. I wasn't driving, Ashton was driving. It felt like The Woman in the Window mixed with Gone Girl or Girl in the Train. Like, it was such a good story, and I know that Riley Sager's known for his plot twists. I tried so hard to guess the plot twist at the end and I was way off. I wasn't even thinking that the twist that he had would be a possibility. It was so good. I guess I will say I predicted a really small part of the plot twist, but there were 2 really big elements of it that I didn't see coming. It's split in like before and after sections like that. It's really good. Very limited characters too, which makes it easy to follow along. You know, you only have like the main protagonist, you've got her husband, and then you have a couple across the lake, and you've got a single guy that lives on the lake as well, or helps around the lake basically. But I cannot wait to read more Riley Sager this new year. I want to read The Only One Left, and he has a ton of other ones too. So this is really good. 5 stars, like I said. The next book I read, number 17 for the year, was Sally Rooney's Conversation with Friends. This was also my first Sally Rooney book that I read, and I know that she has a lot of mixed opinions about her books. Some people really enjoy them, others are confused and don't like them as much. I will say, going into this, I didn't know that she was an author that writes dialogue without using quotation marks. So if that's something that bothers you, just a heads up. I feel like once I have that voice in my head that's like reading for me, you really have to turn that on to know like when a character is speaking. Very interesting plot, definitely more psyche driven. The ending infuriated me only because I could relate to her decision. Like, my younger self in my early 20s did the same thing that she did at the end of the book, and I was like, girl, after all the progress we made to get over that, you went right back. But it was still a really good read, and the sentences kind of just swirl into your brain. I feel like the writing is unlike any other book that I've read in a while, and I'm excited to read Normal People hopefully this year. And I think, let me look, I gave it 3 stars. After thinking about it more, that's all that it was. I liked it, but I wasn't in love with it, and it definitely wasn't a 5-star read to me. But I still really liked it. At this point, it's October, book number 18 of the year, Witch of Wild Things. This was so cute. Definitely the perfect magical realism romance book, I would say. Also, the cover is beautiful. I love all the plants and herbalism, witchiness sprinkled into this little story. I read this very quickly, and I believe I gave it, yes, 5 stars. I think the little quotation grab on the cover perfectly describes it. It says, a perfect mix of magical realism and swoony romance. It's really sweet. There is also a very small plot about sibling loss, and she gets an ending that I wish other people could get that have gone through that. It was just really good. Definitely the perfect October read. If I wanted to read something that was definitely in like the fall theme but wasn't a thriller, and this magical realism romance witchy book was like the perfect read. But the next book that I read this last year was Amy Bloom's White Houses. This is a historical fiction book on Hick and Eleanor Roosevelt. Hick was referred to as the first friend to Roosevelt, and it's about their love story. It definitely had me Googling a lot afterwards to see how much was based off of fact or inspired by true events. There's also a newer book that was just released this year. I believe that one is called First Ladies or something like that. That is a very similar plot, but definitely a great queer historical fiction book. I gave this book 4 stars. I will say I went into my reading slump like halfway through this book, so it took me a little bit to get through, and because I lost that momentum and I took that break, it was hard to get back into reading, and the rest of the year I feel like I really struggled with that. But the next book that I read early November, I had to, was November 9th by Colleen Hoover. I gave this book 3 stars. It was decent, definitely wasn't something that I loved, but it wasn't as bad as maybe Someday by her. I just felt like I had to read it in early November on November 9th to get the full experience. I know a lot of people loved this story. I just could not get that connected to it. It follows these 2 people who meet up on November 9th every single year, but they don't see each other on any other day. So they like live their own lives and then meet up on November 9th and then part ways for like 5 years, and you kind of see where they're at each year in their life at that time. It picked up a little bit in the end. There were a couple of like little plot twists that got me, but it was hard to relate to them because you only see them once a year, and it just didn't feel like that realistic of a love story because they only met up once a year. I also just don't think I'm that big of a fan of when the guy is like so in love with the girl right away, where like he meets her and immediately knows like no matter what you're gonna end up with me. Like I don't like that, and I feel like this kind of had that energy. The next book that I read in November was The Falling in Love Montage by Sierra Smith. This was really cute. It's a British YA love story. I didn't know that it was British, and I didn't know that it was YA. It's funny because there are a lot of like UK British slang used in this book that kind of cracked me up a bit or caught me off guard and then had me wondering what it meant. But I didn't realize it was YA until I read it, and I think that kind of took me out of it because it was very YA. However, it makes me happy that this exists because I think my teenage self would have really appreciated a queer femme love story like this, and that's exactly what it is. They basically do all of the typical like love montage in movies, like activities that you see in romance movies where they're like on a Ferris wheel, going to a carnival, going to the movies, baking, like whatever they do in that like love montage of a romance rom-com movie, they do together and try not to fall in love. I don't know. It was cute, but definitely kind of a struggle to get through and not one of my favorites, but I think my younger self might have appreciated it. I gave it 2 stars. But this next book I gave 4 stars, and I did really, really enjoy it. It was She Gets the Girl by Rachel Lippincott and Allison Derrick. And what I loved so much about this story is that when I finished it and I was reading the acknowledgements, I realized the authors are married. They're wives, and they wrote this amazing, adorable little YA love story. These girls are at college, and this one girl really wants this specific girl to fall in love with her, so she has like a wing woman where this girl Alex is like, I know Cora, I know how to get Cora to fall in love with you, let me help you. So then Alex works with the protagonist, her name's Molly, to try to get Molly to ask Cora out, and it's got that wing woman element where at the end you realize, oh my god, am I supposed to be with the person I wanted or the person that's been with me all along? It's cute, it's well written, it kept my engagement so much more than this one did, and these are both YA queer love stories, but I would recommend She Gets the Girl so much more. And I just love the fact that they wrote this together, and in the acknowledgements I literally underlined their thank you paragraph to each other because it was the cutest thing. Allison writes to Rachel in their thank you to my wife portion of writing this book. She says, thank you for those weird and wonderful 2 weeks at the start of her senior year. Thank you for being my friend first, and for being patient, and for letting me get there on my own. I don't know why it took me so long to figure out that it was always going to be you. You were everything I needed but never knew I could have. I'm not sure how I ever lived my life without you. I love you. I will always love you. Oh my God. So knowing that after reading this book, I almost feel like there are little elements inspired by their love story written into this book, which I appreciated. As like a queer gal, I really love this book and I'm excited to read their other works. I know that they both have written other books, so I do want to read those. It was pretty easy to get through this book, so I'm glad that this had me kind of like reading again. 4 stars, really cute. Sort of the last book that I read this year, but I'm still kind of reading, is The Hunger Games. I was never that big of a Hunger Games fan until I saw the new movie, and it made me want to read that new book, but I felt like it was only fair that I read the first 3 books before I read the new one. I have some videos about the books, so you'll see those out shortly probably, but I'm still reading The Hunger Games. I'm gonna finish it today, but it's such a gem. It was the perfect like holiday book to read because I'm so familiar with the story already. Like I've seen the movie a lot, so I know what's going to happen. I talk more about this in depth in the video that I'm making for this book, but I'm having a really fun time reading this book. I've never read it as a teenager, so I'm still reading it like I said, so that's why it like kind of counts but kind of doesn't. And then I'm going to say that this next book also counts because I'm gonna read it probably later tonight and finish it soon, and that is just Catching Fire. I found these books at Goodwill for like $1 each, and Catching Fire is this beautiful hardcover, so I am gonna read this next, but I think I'm going to kind of count it toward 2023 because it just feels like a good close to this year. But those are the books that I have read in 2023. It wasn't as much as I would hope for, but I'm still really proud. And I know that it's all subjective, and 23 books is a lot to somebody or maybe not a lot to somebody else, but it's hard when you see people that have read like 400 books in 1 year, and I struggled to get through 23, but I am always trying to read as many books as I can, and I think 50 might happen this year. I would have read more this year if I didn't kept getting into these slumps, but I'm always growing as a reader, and now that I have my book Instagram account set up for success, I do want to just read as much as I can to post over on there. Definitely let me know some of the books that you read this last year or any books that you are about to read, which speaking of, I am going to film my anticipated January TBR. Here is your sneak peek, but definitely subscribe and you'll see that video shortly. New year, new books, happy reading. I'll see you in a new video soon. Bye!